Oh, hey, didn't see you there. Just laying in a bed of moss. Welcome to your lesson on bryophytes. So what is a bryophyte? Well, a bryophyte, that word is just the scientific term used to name a group of mosses. So moss, bryophyte mean the same thing. But in science, scientists like to give anything that they come in contact with, right? Trees or plants, other plants or animals or insects or bacteria. They like to give them all a scientific name. And that's just a fancy name that kind of describes what the being is. And in that way, scientists can use those names to draw connections between two maybe very different species, plants, or draw connections to very similar ones. Now, it's kind of like a nickname. So someone whose name is Madeline might go by the name Maddie. Now, Maddie is what everyone will call that child, and that would be kind of like what we all call it mosses, but they do have a formal name. Madeline, just like mosses have a formal name, bryophytes. Now, to put that aside, let's move on to kind of what mosses really are. Mosses, and I hope that you've all seen mosses, and we'll go on a little moss hunting adventure in a little bit, but mosses are going to be really teeny tiny plants. Now, not all teeny tiny plants are mosses, but mosses are always teeny tiny. I'm talking they don't get much more, like the biggest one I think is 20 centimeters, which is like this big, not very big at all. So we're talking plants in the small. So these bryophytes, these mosses, tiny little plants, often stick to the surfaces of things around them, right? So they might be on the surface of a tree or the surface of a rock, right? That top layer of things around them. So the surface of a rock or the surface of a wooden bench or the surface of a tree, the surface of a roof, right? Going to be on that top layer. And the reason being is that they can. Not a lot of other plants can survive out of the soil. So it's kind of brings it down to competition, right? If the soil areas, the places where lots of plants can live, there's going to be more competition for food and water and space and sunlight. So the mosses say, well, I know no plants can grow on the roof of this house. I'll take that spot because they can. And it's really, really cool. So most plants have roots, true roots, big roots that go into the ground and pull up nutrients, water, and kind of hold them into the ground, right? Keeps them stable. Well, mosses don't have roots. What? They have these little tiny fibers, these little tiny string-looking things called rhizoids, and those just kind of help them hold on to the surfaces. But they don't suck up water or nutrients. So how does a moss get its food and water? The really cool thing about mosses is that they can get the water from the air. Or if it rains on them, they can just take it in through their leaves. It's so cool. And then they get their food from whatever minerals and vitamins they can find in that water. So cool. So mosses are super important because they can take, like I said, those spaces that other plants can't, which means that they can expand the plant world to places we didn't even think possible, right? Up the sides of walls, on roofs, on goodness knows, on the tops of trees. Super, super cool plants. Now, they're both really important for the natural world, but they were also really important for humans. So humans, long time ago, before we had modern things, used to use mosses for diapers, insulation, blankets. They would use it as a mattress. They would use it to stop the bleeding of wounds. So cool. So mosses are naturally really absorbent. That means they hold on to water. Or if they're dry, that means they're holding on to air. So that ability to be absorbent or to hold on to the air or the water, if you've got it holding on to water, it's going to be a great thing to wrap your baby in. If the baby goes to the bathroom in this moss-filled diaper, then you can just take it off and compost it into the world, which would be really cool. So way before we had modern day diapers, people would just take a piece of cloth, pop a bunch of moss in it, and put it on their baby. So cool. Another thing they would do is they would dry out the moss, so then it's holding that air, and they would put it in their hats, they would put it in their armpits to keep warm, they'd put it under their beds or in their bed, they would put it in the walls of their houses, and with it being dry and our body heat moving and heating up the room, it would trap that warm air and keep people warm during the winter without modern day insulation. Isn't that amazing? Mosses, really cool. The last super cool thing about mosses that we're going to talk about before we go find them is that the Earth is 4.5 billion with a B years old. That's crazy old. That's older than anything you can think of. Not as old as the universe, of course, but really, really old. Now, way back then, the Earth is not a place that you want to be. It's hot, there's like volcanoes, there's just craziness happening. It's just a swirling mess of matter, just craziness, right? Then it starts to cool and gets more stable, and over time, life appears. Now, they're not exactly sure how this happened, and we're really not going to go into it in a Bryophyte video, because I am not a master on that subject. But at some point, there was life, and most scientists believe that the life was living primarily in the oceans. Now, all this life is in the oceans. It's like plants and maybe some little bacteria, some animals, like weird, funky looking animals. And at some point, the first thing to colonize or to come onto land was probably an ancient, like super old bryophyte. So bryophytes, these mosses, were the first things to live on land. And because of them, you know, they were able to produce some oxygen, you know, take in all that crazy carbon dioxide that was running around the earth, take that in and produce oxygen with photosynthesis, and we'll talk about that later. But they're able to do that. They're able to create a healthier atmosphere full of more oxygen, so then more plants could come onto land, so then those plants could evolve, so then animals could come onto land and evolve into humans, and we could breathe fresh air out here. It's all thanks to mosses. Super cool. Mosses, super cool. So, let's go find some. I am on a walk in our neighborhood, and this is the south. This is a mailbox holder. This is the south side, and there's this whole folklore that moss only grows on the north side of trees. Well, yes and no. Generally speaking, the north side of anything is going to be in less direct sunlight. You're going to get a lot less light, which means you're going to get a lot less heat. So, and moss, as we know, like to stay moist. So this is the south side, and you can see there's just a little tiny bit of moss. I mean, we are in the shade. But if you go to the north side, look, there's tons of mosses here. Tons of them. Now, I'm not exactly positive what these are, but my best guess is that these little hair-like protrusions maybe hold the spores. So this is on brick. You can find them anywhere. Another really interesting place is this little curb that I'm at in our neighborhood, and it's always in the shade, and it's always really damp. And look, a couple different kinds of bryophytes here. Super damp place. I mean, there's like water droplets, and it's super wet. There's up on the rock. So there's a type there, a different kind there. Looks like maybe that's a different kind right there. This might be, I'm not positive about that, be a different kind. Let's see if I can. This would be something super cool to look under a microscope. Up past the third tier to a tree that actually was just cut down. And you can see all these bryophytes in here mixed in with some lichen. That's some lichen and some bryophytes. Lichen are also a master of the surface, that surface layer, except they are not plants. Okay, so here's some bryophytes, some mosses right here. These little guys, they're so cute. Now the interesting thing is when you look at it, you can start to see different kinds in there. So when I say, oh, I found some moss, it's really I found some mosses because I found a couple of different kinds. So this side of the tree, likely getting more moist than the other sides, more shade than the other sides. And that's where the mosses like to be, in that moist, shady environment. Hello everyone. This is my husband, Warren. And we went on a little walk to go find some bryophytes, and he had a question.
Yeah, we noticed that there were a lot more bryophytes on brick than on other surfaces, and I want to know why.
Yeah, so you're going to find bryophytes, mosses on things that are, I mean, you will find them on any surface, but a lot of the times you'll find them on rocks or brick, which is similar to rocks because of the porous nature, especially of bricks. Rocks are also generally can be porous, certain types of rocks. Porous means that the rock or the brick itself has got lots of little holes in it. Now, we might not be able to see a lot of the holes, or they might look really tiny, but if we remember, the bryophytes don't have true roots to hold them into the ground or to hold them onto the surfaces. They've got those rhizoids, which are like those little fibers that stick out the bottom of them, kind of like roots in that they hold them in place. And those rhizoids are going to be sticking into those little holes and those porous places to hold on. The other thing too is if you were to get if you had like a piece of obsidian, which is like a really slick black rock, and you tried to pour water on that, the obsidian's not going to hold any water. Versus like clay or brick or rock, it's going to, those little holes, the water's going to absorb into that, which is a perfect place for a moss because moss need water.
Cool.
Any further questions?
No, thank you.
Okay. Bye.